decided to become a full-time educator and a mentor for startups. So that's what I love doing. COVID has put an end to my intensive traveling, but what I have done is gone online. And what I'm going to share with you today is based on my own experiences with teaching. I come from a family of teachers, by the way. Share with you some of my experiences with teaching and with this whole new world which has hit us so suddenly. I have been helping a lot of clients in my aerial avatar to actually digitize. And I believe that we have been forced, or the education sector has actually been forced to change overnight into digital education. It is my very frank opinion that I think this has been coming for a long time. We didn't really accept it. And COVID has actually accelerated the process, which makes what I'm going to talk to you about now, how do you build your brand as individual educators, and why should that be important at all? So in the next 30 or 35 minutes, I'm going to talk about some features of brand building which are relevant and which I have applied to all of us as educators. I'm going to cover what a brand is. Do you really need to be a brand? What is driving this whole personal branding today in the digital age? And how do you build a personal brand? I have shared with Varun, and I think he's going to share that with you, a small takeaway about 8 steps on what you can do to build your own brand. One of the mistakes a lot of branding experts do, and a lot of people who want to be on social media do, is they believe that branding is having a Twitter handle and a LinkedIn profile. Not at all. Branding is something much, much deeper. And that's what I'm going to cover today. It has to be intrinsic to the person whose brand is being built. Otherwise, it comes through as very false. And you see that all the time with all our celebrities. Most of them have not understood the concepts of branding, but you as educators need to do that because we're not in the celeb space. We are in the knowledge space. And I would like to share my learnings about that with you. You must be aware that branding comes from the Old Norse word brander, which means burning a brand into the skin of cattle to, first of all, identify them as belonging to you, and more importantly, to differentiate them from everyone else's herd. If you take this to human branding or to branding in a marketing context, we are talking about how to differentiate ourselves as brands from competition, right? And in today's digital world, the competition is increasing every day. Because of technology and because of the democratization that the internet brings us, everybody is jumping onto the internet bandwagon. So your competition, and this is something I want you to remember, is no longer from other teachers in your school or in the class next door. It is from anybody globally, right? So that is all the more reason why you as educators need to be able to build your brand strongly. I keep getting asked this question, can anything be branded? Absolutely. It's not just products and services. We are so familiar with Nike and Apple, we think that's all that can be branded. But no, people are equally important. And celebrities have been doing this forever. But I believe the time has come now for all of us as educators to build our own brands. I'm going to look at an air conditioner, give you an example of what exactly I mean by building a brand. I'm going to look at an air conditioner. So if you read this chart that I have just put up, we're talking about various levels of a product, starting with the core benefit level of an AC, which is to cool and comfort. We're talking about cooling capacity, which is generic to the product or category. We expect an air conditioner to have at least 2 cooling speeds and a warranty. Um, to differentiate it from competition, we prefer brand A over brand B because it has electronic touchpad, it has a display, it has a toll-free number. And finally, if you look at the potential, can we look at an air conditioner which senses, a smart AC, which senses when different people come into the room and provide the air conditioning or provide the degree of cooling that he or she always lacks, right? So if you look at an air conditioner, these would be the 5 levels. I would apply the same thing. Forgive me for the blasphemy, but I thought this was very important for all of us to understand. I would apply this to a teacher. Our core benefit, and I am a teacher as well, our core benefit is to share knowledge. At a generic level, we should be able to explain concepts. We are expected to be able to explain concepts and in today's world, provide real-world examples. What will differentiate one teacher from the other is the ability to create what is called an experiential learning experience and provide learning with a purpose. This is something that I advocate very strongly. Knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge, has to have a purpose. And finally, at a potential level, and this is particularly relevant for us today when we are moving away from the physical classroom to the digital, we need to understand the needs and pressures of Gen Z, who are our students, and empower them with the tools and applied knowledge that they need to cope with this ever-changing, very, very difficult world. So whether it's pre-COVID or post-COVID, I think the world is changing. I hate the word new normal, but I think that's really the new avatar that all of us have got to embrace. More so us as educators, because we have to pass our knowledge on to this younger generation who face a very, very tough ride ahead. So my submission to all of you is that it is no longer enough to be a good teacher. I have redefined teaching, and some of my friends in academia frown at me when I do this. You need to actually be a stand-up, which means that you need to be entertaining. You need to be tech savvy, and that's for sure. I think Varun and I spent a good 30 minutes this morning setting up this whole technology for you today, which I hope is working, by the way. We are edutainers. We entertain and in the process educate. And we obviously have to be much, much more than Google. So this is my new definition of a teacher. You may disagree with me violently, but I think this is the definition that will come to stay in this new digital world. What is driving this change other than COVID? COVID obviously is an accelerator, and it is changing behavior. I've been looking at behavior and the way the internet is actually changing human behavior. And I think it is making profound changes in the way we consume everything, including education. There's a convergence of education and technology called tech ed, and there is a demand from our customers. And I'm using the word deliberately here, not students. I'm saying that our customers are the students who demand customized courses to suit their mode and their pace of learning. Traditional education models are kind of getting intermediated. I was reading about how Harvard and Oxford are looking at new models to serve the same education and knowledge to students who are anywhere in the world. So you have synchronous and asynchronous classes, and you have all the jargon that goes with it. But basically, we are looking at programs to suit students' requirements. Globalization is changing the name of the game. It changed the markets, and now it's changing education. Because technically, a teacher sitting in England can be teaching a class in Ranchi because of the internet. So there are no barriers anymore. And that is a big change that I want you all to embrace. Your competition is no longer your fellow teacher in the same school. Your competition is a teacher from anywhere in the world who has the necessary subject matter expertise, which is why when Varun told me about this subject, I was very, very excited, because I think this is what is going to drive the future of education, building individual teacher brands that can be embraced anywhere. I used to grumble, just like all my fellow educators do, about the lack of the reading habit and the way that, kids don't read anymore. And I'm just thinking, if we had been born today, would we read? I remember when I was in management school, we had to go to the library and actually pick up huge tomes, which we then had to read word for word. The written word is becoming probably, and I'm sorry to sound blasphemous again, is becoming probably less interesting than the audiovisual media. Google, who I believe has actually destroyed the reading habit, with all due apologies to the company, has provided us with so much rich multimedia material, which makes it completely experiential. It makes the acquisition of knowledge so experiential. The other change that digitization connectivity is bringing about, and this is extremely important, is that our customer, our students, their parents, all of them want to actually participate in the process of their education. And they're pretty articulate and involved in it, especially because there's social media where they can talk about their feelings and their learnings, and obviously criticize us as well. So these are some of the factors that I'd like you to keep in mind when we look at the further slides that I'm going to show you. So the need of the hour for educators, for all educators in fact, it doesn't really matter what and where you teach, is to actually position yourself correctly, right? And positioning comes from the French word chrono, which means a hole in the head. So you literally have to find a unique hole in the head where you can position yourself based on what is different about you. So some of it is subject matter expertise, some of it is your experience as a teacher, some of it is imagery related and the kind of image that you build of yourself. And here I recommend that that image is built on a strong foundation rather than on a flimsy stuff, right? As educators, our foundations cannot be like a celebrity, cannot be the way celebrities build their image. Ours has to be built on performance and delivery of knowledge. Now, when you decide on this positioning, please be clear that it has to be relevant, distinct, and believable to your audience. And you have to be able to deliver it sustainably year after year after year. So please keep this in mind when you're looking at your individual position. This is a small format or a framework I thought would be interesting for all of you. We know what a fad is, right? Highly loved and with no respect. It dies. As teachers, we tend to either be products, that is neither loved nor respected. Hopefully, a number of us are brands where we are highly respected, but we're not able to build that emotional connect with our students. But what I would like all of us to be is to become what are called love marks, where we are not only loved, and I don't mean romantic love. I mean the love which is born out of respect, because we are able to teach. I know teachers and educators are the most underpaid profession, probably on par with doctors and policemen. But I think what drives us all is not the money so much as the passion for being able to mold young minds. And I think the best reward for a teacher is a little note from a student saying, "Thank you, ma'am. Right? You made my day." And I think that's what drives us, which is why it's very easy for us to be love marks. I'm using a product analogy here, but it is equally applicable to people. We are a service, really, which inspires loyalty beyond reason. And if we can do this, I think our role is justified. Please remember also that in today's age of social media, you can be a very powerful influencer, right? Either reaching dozens, what is called a peer influencer in your small immediate circle. You can have a larger circle of influence, which is called a niche influencer, or you can be like Oprah Winfrey, where you're actually broadcasting to the world. And I know a lot of educators who are actually very, very powerful influencers, and rightly so. They deserve to be where they are. I'm a very practical person, and having worked all my life in advertising and marketing, I want to share with you how you need to build your brand. Right? And this is very critical. It's nice to give you a lot of theoretical knowledge, but I think if I can share with you my experiences in building brand, that will be much more useful to you. The first step in brand building is actually defining who you are, what you stand for, and that's your inner core. And this is something only you can decide for yourself, right? Now, based on this, you can figure out what should be the response from your students or from your audience towards you. And what is the kind of relationship that you would like to build with them? So these are the 4 steps that you need to define before you look at yourself as a brand. I am known as the value proposition lady. Varun will testify to this. I always insist that everybody needs a value proposition, including an educator. And a value proposition is a very simple idea. It says, who is your customer? In this case, your students. What is the pain that you are going to relieve them from? And how are you different and better from your competition? I know this sounds very, very commercial, but think about it. I'm going to give you an example of Evernote, which is a mobile app. And I would like you to spend just a minute reading what I put up on this chart. It says, for busy professionals who are always on the move and need to stay organized, Evernote is a computer application that is so simple to use as rated by users. So you can't say you're great, other people need to say you're great. Allows one to save all thoughts, ideas, instructions, and to-do lists in one place, and they are available anytime, anywhere, and on any device. Now, this is one of the most difficult things that you will have to do. I've given you a small tip on how this can be done in the takeaway, but please do sit down and figure out what you stand for and what your value proposition is to your audience, who are your students. If you have to build a relationship, and this is very important, particularly today, because all of us are teaching online and not physically. It's much easier to build these relationships when you can see someone face to face. Right now, you can probably see a blank video screen. So how do you build a relationship? The first rule here, how do you interact with them? How do you talk to them continuously? And how do you control the whole conversation? The first step is very importantly, both for building a brand and for building a relationship, is to know your audience. Now, you're very lucky if you have children of the same age as your students. And if you don't, I strongly recommend meeting a lot of them, doing some of your own market research to understand what goes on in their minds, to understand how they think, to understand how they consume media, what they like and what they don't like, what their online behavior is all about. Now, this may be an additional chore for you, but this is exactly what we do as brand builders when we talk about consumers. And if your student is your consumer, then this is something you need to do as the educator of the future. Please remember, in addition to being a brand, you're also the brand manager. And you need to manage their expectations of experience by building on those experiences which add value and eliminating those experiences which are negative. and keeping this whole experience completely relevant to your audience, to your class of students. And however young they are, they've already been defined a lot by social media and technology. So you need to be very, very aware of this, and you need to manage their expectations of experience. Otherwise, it causes a lot of angst and disappointment, particularly because the young, or most importantly, we need to manage their expectations and deliver an experience to our students which they will remember and which will impact them on all these three levels. It's not enough to do it physically anymore. You need to look at the sensory and the emotional angles as well. And please be prepared for criticism, especially because everyone has access to social media. It can be very hurtful at times to be trolled, but it's good because people are actually telling you what they really feel. They're using the anonymity of social media to tell you how they really feel. I always believe that this is a great thing to learn and to improve, provided you don't take it personally. Very difficult to do, believe me, but worth it. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about presentation skills. I know as teachers, you've been doing it forever. All of us have. But to deliver a lecture, you have to become a presenter. I was reading that especially for online education, people are paying for good presenters from the corporate world to take on classes and teaching. And I'm sure with all our subject matter expertise and our knowledge, we can learn to be good presenters as well. Please notice I am using the word presenters very, very delicately. So please don't take me amiss. This is going to be what you need to learn. And this is one of the most important things to build your brand. You need to create what I call a SMART framework. You need to plan, design, create, practice, deliver, and analyze your presentation every single time. I've been presenting since I've been in corporate life and teaching last 27 years. But every time I make a presentation, including for today, I spent at least 2 or 3 hours working on it and figuring out what I was going to say to you. And this is becoming critical. So in addition to all the other things we teachers do, you also need to learn how to prepare for a presentation. Firstly, know about your audience. Most important. Secondly, design your presentation for the audience and not for you. We want to tell our audience what's in it for them. WIIFT is an acronym for what's in it for them, right? So it's not what we want to say, it's what they want to hear. And this is the big difference between delivering a class or delivering a lecture and making a presentation. Structure it right. You need a very, very clear structure because at the end of the day, it is a learning exercise. Right? You need to tell a story. You need to come back and forth between facts and figures and theory and a story. And you need to tell this story right. Don't use humor until if you don't know your audience well and you can't do it well. But you need to create a proper story. So your lecture is now being transformed into a presentation, which is now being transformed into a story. And good old Aristotle theory of ethos, pathos, and logos still holds good. You need the credibility, which you have as an educator. You need to build in your emotional appeal. And finally, you need to have logic, reasoning, and facts, because that is the foundation that your pedagogy stands on. I call it death by PowerPoint. And I think in my corporate career, I must have seen at least about 15,000 presentations. I really call it death by PowerPoint. Use PowerPoint. Most of us are forced to use that medium today. Use it wisely. And these are some of the tips that I'd like to share with you. Make it short and don't bore your audience to tears. use visuals, relevant visuals, which are meaningful. We don't use enough visual imagery when we are teaching. We are talking to a generation which is brought up on visual imagery and Instagram, right? And we need to accept that. I'm sorry, I'm actually not using visuals today because I don't think you are Gen Z anyway. So I'm sorry to do that to you, but I believe using color, not provided it's meaningful and relevant, is fine. So if you look at my slide, and I'd just like to share this with you, it has a bindi, which is my brand identity. It has simple red and white, easy to read, very, very small, very large font, which is readable, very easy to look at and digest, especially when you've got a lot of text to share. Deliver right. Remember, you're the medium and the message, right? So you are the person. You are like a newspaper or you're like a TV show. You need to be like a TV actor. Preparation is going through the roof. You need to actually prepare and do a dry run with all the equipment and technology. Those of you who are not familiar with technology, I want to share a thought with you. Don't be frightened by it. You just need to download a beta version or a free version and play with it. Actually play with it to get used to it. That's the only way you will lose your fear of technology. And believe me, most technology is built for dummies. That's the way it is developed. And it's very easy to use, but you need to spend a little bit of time. And I think our generation, not so used, my generation particularly, not so used to technology. You just need to spend that little extra time. It's worth it, believe me. Postmortem's great in this case because whenever you do a presentation, analyze, get feedback. Don't be frightened of feedback. Ask your students what they thought. And as an experienced teacher, you will know when you've done well. You know in your gut when you made a good, when you taught. People are getting, including your students, are getting demanding, cynical, savvy, very aware because of Mr. Google, and very value conscious. So they're constantly asking you two questions. What's in it for me? Why should I sit in for this particular class? What is it that I am going to get from you? And what should I believe you? What is your credibility about telling me this? And this is something, it's not written in stone anymore. It's, as I told you, globalization is changing the rules of the game. You constantly have to reinvent yourself and why people should believe you. I have adapted this from digital behaviors of our new omni-channel consumer. That's our new student, right? Our student lives and loves on his mobile or her mobile phone. And we need to be very, very clear about this, right? So I'm saying that being accessible, being engaging, being able to customize your lessons to suit your audience and not yourself, being able to connect on various levels with your students and being able to collaborate, because that is the best way of learning. So this whole thing about experiential learning and how you make them come up with the concepts and which you just then clarify, I think is the way to go. It's very tough. I'm not saying it's easy at all. I've learned this the very, very hard way. You need to be able to do this. And you need to actually give up control. And again, this is from my personal experience. After controlling a class and being the pivot of the class, in this new era, you need to actually give up control to the students and help them to learn through the experience. So good teachers, and before I end this, I would like to leave you with a couple of thoughts. Good teachers need to be people specialists, which a lot of us are anyway, and also good communicators. You need to like your students because they pick that up very, very quickly. You need to be able to understand them. You need to know how to communicate with them. And there are certain languages, certain language that you use, certain phrases, certain references, which means that you need to keep current with what is going on in the world around you. right? I used to use a lot of Shakespearean references because my mother was a Shakespearean scholar. And I suddenly realized I got these blank faces in class. I realized that it's just not relatable. The moment I switched to Hindi, no ways, I got my audience, right? So while you don't need to bring things down, you don't need to dump things down, you still need to talk to them in a language that they understand. And finally, you need to communicate with them. You can't be strong and silent anymore. You need to be able to talk to them all the time. Please remember, I say this lightly and seriously, you are competing with social media at the end of the day, right? And you are now a stand-up, tech-savvy educator who gives the students much more than Google can or Google ever will. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed what I had to share with you. I'm most happy to answer any questions which Varun is going to curate. I'll be happy to spend the next few minutes answering all your questions. Thank you so much for your attention. Hey, Varun, ready for you.
Wow, that was an extremely insightful session on building a brand. Professor, I really liked how you broke it down into the four simple steps of building an identity, working on the meaning, creating a brand response, and creating a brand relationship. It was
Thank you,
very,
Varun.
very insightful. So, dear teachers, we are open to questions now. You can ask questions to Professor Malavika, and she would be answering on with regards to brand building. So, this is the first question from Najma Jahara. She asking, do you agree that educators should always move from known concepts to abstract concepts? How should we divide our teaching time into creating a multi-level classroom?
Okay. Najma, uh, I'm clear, right? Can you all hear me? All right.
Yes, Professor, you are.
Great. So, Najma, it is very difficult to do, right? But I have found um, I use a lot of cases and a lot of live examples to demonstrate concepts. Because the moment you make it very, very theoretical, I notice that you lose a lot of your attention. You lose a lot of your students' attention. So what I try and do is I do have a theory module because I do believe that you do need to know the basics, right? I'm experimenting a lot with video and I'm trying to see whether we can convert some of those theoretical concepts into short videos, which the students can kind of see before they come to class. And then I use the class time, probably a 50-50 split, to talk about examples, to give them a little live example and ask them to analyze it and try and use some of the formats and some of the frameworks that I have shared with them that they are supposed to have looked at before they came to class, or which I have covered in my initial session. So I normally look at a 50-50 split. And I urge you to check whether you can do videos. It's very easy to do today. All of us have a laptop or a mobile phone. Very easy to create videos, not more than 4 to 6 minutes, because that is the normal attention span, and share it with your students before the class so that they will listen and watch and then come and use the class for interaction. I find that seems to work very well in explaining concepts.
Right. That's a very interesting thought point, Professor. So there's a counter question from Miss K. Nair. Her question reads out something like this. After teaching in the conventional way for the last 25 years, how does one change suddenly? Just teaching online itself is a huge challenge. How does one embrace the change?
Okay. It's very difficult, right? I personally love the online, I love the online process, which is why I spend all my weekends, in addition to a very, very tough job. I used to travel so that I could teach. I love the experience, and I love that Indian concept of bhava and rasa. So I used to provide bhava or emotion, which caused rasa in my students, which got me more bhava, right? So I love this concept of bhava and rasa. It was very difficult for me. But I realized, and I've been realizing this for the last 3 to 4 years, that things are changing. For example, prescribed textbooks are no longer even opened. In fact, I've had students telling me, "Oh, but ma'am, it's such a big textbook." And I said, "Did you open it?" They said, "Yeah, we looked at the last page. It's 800 pages. There's no way I'm going to read it back." So if that was the response, I said, I still need to inculcate knowledge in them. So I thought about it deeply. Obviously, I moaned and groaned, and I talked to all my colleagues, and we all said, "What is this generation coming to?" Till one day, my son told me, "You know, Amma, if you'd been born," I have a son who's a doctor, and he told me, "Amma, you know, if you've been born in my generation, you would have realized that you don't read anymore. When you can watch it on video, and it's much more interesting. You can listen to it, right?" So it took me a lot of effort. And I think COVID kind of hastened the process. But I'd already started teaching online about a year ago. You need to have a setup. You need to kind of work with it. And you need to tell yourself this is the future, right? Now, is it different? Of course it is. Do you need to work harder? Of course you do. Are you going to be paid more? No, I think you're going to be paid less because you're going to make much more effort, right? But do you have to do it? It is true. You need to learn it for yourself. Do not be dependent on anybody. And frankly, it is DIY, right? You can do it yourself. You just need to spend that. It probably will take you 2 hours, where it could take someone else 30 minutes. But it's worth that 2 hours. And that's what I did. I've taught myself everything I know about technology. I actually used to work with a lot of technology. I love technology. But I've taught myself everything. I've taught myself everything I know. I do not depend on my son because I know that I've got to do it finally myself. So embrace it. It's difficult, believe me, very, very difficult. And one of the biggest learnings I've had is use a laptop or a computer to do your teaching rather than a mobile phone. So that's one of the investments you should make in yourself and your teaching career, using a laptop.
Right. That's a very interesting thought point, Professor. But I've seen that in our teacher community as well, a lot of teachers are now investing into buying teaching laptops. But on the quality front, I mean, it's a very important investment as well, right? So and I don't see schools helping here on any front. It is extremely on the lines of a teacher as well, and with regards to the salary cuts and stuff. So it is sort of turning into a very unfair system for the educators. What are your thoughts on that?
You're right. It's absolutely incorrect. If your school or your education institution expects you to teach online, they need to provide you with the wherewithal. Okay. I believe, especially at the school level, and if you don't have an alternative, like I've been very, very lucky to have, it is difficult. But having said that, right, I think this is an investment that you need to make. Now, if you don't have a laptop, I'm going to give you another alternative, very simple alternative. Get your smartphone. Most of us have smartphones. You get them for less than 10K. Get a small stand for it, okay? And put a light in front of it like I have done just now and use it. Because some of the smartphones give you as good results as a laptop. It's going to be a bit of a strain for you, but it's a good place to start. And it is tough. I'm not disagreeing with that at all.
Thank you for that, Professor. There's a question from Dr. Sachin HP. It reads out something like this. While creating our own brand value, do we need to work just in the side of the management, or how can we, uniquely position ourselves?
Sachin, that's an interesting question. And it's always a bit of a dilemma. Do you build your individual brand or do you build your organizational brand? And I think you need a combination of both, because part of your brand identity stems from the educational institution that you belong to, particularly if it is a very well-known organization. Now, having said that, you still need to invest in building your own personal brand, right? And I think it's a 50-50 balance between your organization and you. In some cases, if you've seen, I've seen a lot of educators who actually overpower, like a lot of brand ambassadors, overpower the brands that they represent. I don't think that's very healthy. And I think it needs to be a sort of 50-50 balance, 50% your brand and 50% the organization that you belong to. And slowly, what does happen is that the organization becomes a credibility factor, and your brand automatically becomes more important, right? So it's a very delicate balance that you need to achieve.
Okay. Thank you for that, Professor. There are questions from Mr. Jitender and Ms. Najma. They are on the similar lines. So it reads out something like, for sure, our students are missing the emotional and physical attachment they had with their teachers. Apart from teaching, what other activities can we have with the students to cover up this gap? And also, a second question here is that engaging students online in online teaching is very challenging, and only a few students respond to that. So, how can educators work over that?
Okay. This does depend on the kind of platform you use. Engagement is difficult, but think about it this way. Even in a physical classroom, you have about 30 to 40% of your students actually engaged. The others are sleeping with their eyes wide open, right? And I think all of us as educators have actually experienced this. The only thing in class, you can tell them to go get up and wash their faces, right? You can wake them up. How do you do this online? The way I've looked at it is I keep a list of students by my side, whoever is attending my class. I keep a list of names, and I just randomly it's called cold calling. I randomly call upon them and ask them a question. All right. And I also tell them that there is going to be a certain amount of marks for class participation. So that ensures that they do some homework before they come. One of the biggest challenges that I am facing, and I'm sure all of you face, is that because of connectivity issues in our country, a lot of them have to keep their video off and they have to mute their sound, okay? Because most of them are taking their classes on their parents' smartphones. Now, that is a big challenge. So I use this little method of keeping keeping a list with me and doing this cold calling. On Zoom and other platforms, you can actually create what are called breakaway rooms. So you give them a question or you give them a little assignment. They go into their rooms, they discuss it, they get into a virtual huddle, and then they come back, and I make them all present, right? So that keeps engagement going. There are also some sorts of software that you can use where you can have polls. Zoom has this built in. I'm sorry, I'm not an ambassador of Zoom, but I'm finding it the most useful right now. But all software has this where you can have little polls and little, wake them up. So every 4 or 5 minutes, just like I do in real class, I ask a question. I switch off my screen. Stop sharing my screen, and I spend the time talking to them. And I insist that when they come online and they're answering a question, they need to do it with their video on. Right? I can't insist on it all the time. I need to be sensitive to the fact that a lot of them have connectivity issues. In fact, one of my mentees sits in a field and talks to me because that's the only place the guy gets an internet connection. So you have to play this, and you have to break your presentation and your lesson into, I think 5 minutes works very well. Every 5 minutes, take a break. That's why I call you edutators. I call us all edutators.
Thank you for that, Professor. We have a question from Dr. Gopal Gumma, who has joined us from RI Mysore. It reads out something like, how can one create content, especially in subjects like science, to to bring out skills in students?
Okay. I was attending a webinar a couple of days ago uh, on the Harvard HBS site. And I found, while the usual things, they told us about all the usual things, there was one thing which was very interesting. For science, they were talking particularly about STEM subjects. And what I found very interesting was that they create these labs, right? So you create these labs, these are virtual, labs are virtual. You put in two students, probably, with different backgrounds. So one is well versed and one isn't so well versed, maybe without the background. You put them into these lab sessions, get them to work on the concepts, do this, pre-plan it, and then they come back and they present and they talk about their learnings. Okay. The other way is to do a whole bunch of exercises, both in class and take home. And I find that some of the exercises you need to do in class, which means you need to budget that kind of time for it. Make them do the exercises in class individually and then come back to you with the answers which they present in class, and get the rest of the class to ask questions and encourage them to sort of consolidate their knowledge. I find that works very well, particularly in STEM subjects. I like this thought of combining two people, a breakout room maybe, and giving them exercises. But then you must make them present the exercises, and that's where the learning actually takes place. So one of the things, Professor, that I'd like to share with you is cut down your content by 70%. Cut down your content by at least 30%. So where you were teaching a class, and you were going to have, say, I'm just going to use slides as an example, where you're going to use 30 slides, reduce it to 10, because online teaching is much, much slower than physical teaching. And keep that as a reading or as an exercise or whatever you need to do.
Great. Thank you for that, Professor. There's one question from... I'm sorry for that. Give me a second. Yes, I'm sorry. So there's a question from Ms. Rajni Pradeep. How long should the online sessions be for children in kindergarten to primary classes, especially when it is going to be for the next entire semester? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm just thinking maybe 30 minutes max, all right? And then maybe the next 30 minutes you can do a sort of, play session or make them sing and dance. And, you need to kind of vary that. Even with older students, I'm finding that you need to have a break every 45 minutes. Otherwise, you lose the attention spans. Postgraduate is a little longer, but even there I find 45 minutes is the maximum for an older student. For kids, maybe 30 minutes and then a little break and a playtime and then come back, have a snack, whatever. You need to be very flexible in these things. And I think making them participate more will improve the learning. But yeah, it's a tough one because a lot of them are taking their lessons on their parents' smartphones, especially in our country. And that's a difficult one to do. But 30 minutes, I think, max. For postgraduate level, 45 minutes to an hour, not more than that. After that, you definitely need a break. So I do that break deliberately, give them about 15 minutes off, and then they come back, I notice, refreshed. I add an exercise and do whatever it needs to take. So on the 1.5 hours, I normally do a 50-50 at a PG level. Kids level, 30 minutes, max.
Yes, thank you for that. There's a follow-up question from Ms. Rajni Pradeep. What do you think about the assessments part in the lower grades? How reliable is it? How reliable are online assessments for lower grades?
Very, very unreliable, if you ask me. If you compare it with the traditional way of, of correction, if you look at it very differently, and I'm beginning to look at that because initially I was quite perturbed that people were, plagiarizing, cutting, pasting. I actually had a case 2 days ago where one of my students had gone online to some obscure sources and had done a cut and paste without realizing there is a software to track that. It's disturbing, right? So what I've tried to do now is I've changed the way we set the paper. So I made the paper more application oriented. It's easier to do when you're doing it in management, right? So I've tried to make the papers more application oriented, where you cannot answer the question unless you know the theory, right? And that ensures that they have understood the theory. It's not so much putting the framework up, because that they cut paste anyway. But if you can get them to apply that theory or that framework, you are able to assess it. But it's not perfect by any stretch of imagination. They're trying with different formats. I think there was a demo right now with something called Metal. You have ExamSoft. You have lots of software going. But believe me, kids are smart enough. They can get around anything. So unless you do it physically, you're not going to get that perfect, perfect exercise that you used to, and you could in a physical classroom. It's tough, very tough. So you have to change the way you examine them. I think class participation is a great way to ensure that they keep up with the class, because they love to compete. See, I'm using that because they love to compete. They don't like to be shown up in front of their classmates, which is why they study and come to class. And I'm using that fairly consciously.
Thank you for that, sir. There's one question from Mr. Paspuliti. It reads out something like, what would be the right mediums or the channels for teachers to build their own personal brand? Yes, teacher, of course, but yeah. What do you think would be the idea?
Teacher, of course. LinkedIn is another good brand. LinkedIn is another professional brand, which is useful. I am finding a lot of teachers use Facebook. So I have a lot of colleagues of mine who are using Facebook very, very effectively to keep in touch with their students, right? And to build their own brand. So I thought LinkedIn and Facebook, if you have regular stuff that you want to say and you have that kind of time, which frankly I don't, Twitter is a good medium. These are the three sort of serious media that you can use. Having said that, as a teacher, you need to be very careful about what you post, much more careful than a normal person, right? So be very careful about what you post. And if you're very serious about this, I would recommend building what is called a content calendar, as to saying what you're going to post over the next 3 months and then sticking to it. The one thing about building an online brand is it takes a lot of time, and you need to have good content. You need to build good content which is of interest to your viewers. Right? That's the only way to do it, which means a lot of hard work, and I'm not sure that all of us have the time. But a good LinkedIn profile for sure, and I think all of you need to invest the time to do that. Very important. Teacher, of course. And look at Facebook, because kids nowadays don't differentiate between personal social media and official social media. So I was quite shocked when all my kids, my students reached out to me on Facebook. But I've used that. I said, fair enough. It's nothing. I don't post anything so personal on Facebook that I don't want them to know. For that, I have my WhatsApp. But I use Facebook regularly, right? And I post whatever I want to on it. The other thing I found that with every class I run, I have a WhatsApp group running parallelly, because I find people don't, while I do use Moodle, which the organization provides, the LMS, I also use WhatsApp for informal communication, sending them reminders, sending them stuff that I picked up. So I use a combination of the two. And I think WhatsApp works very well, also to build your personal brand.
Thank you for that, Professor. We just take one last question. This is from Padma Priyavi. Madam, which tool should be used to test grade 11 and grade 12 students and above? Formative assessment of any kind to check their understanding level of the concept, or anything else?
What I do, I'm not very conversant with grade 11, 12. I don't really teach that age group, but I'm going to take a guess because I do teach undergraduate as well. I think you need to you need to explain stuff very graphically to them, right? So whatever concepts you're teaching, they seem to absorb rather than the written word, they seem to absorb it graphically. So one of the things I'm doing is to attach a small tablet to my computer, or use the whiteboard. So I use a lot of the whiteboard while I'm teaching, where I actually draw out. I like to use the board a lot, so I use that to talk about the various frameworks. And I'm finding that instead of words, a simple graphic representation actually improves the teaching process. I know I haven't answered your question completely, but this is based on my experience.
Thank you so much for that, Professor. And dear teachers, with that, we have come to the end of the conclave on management strategies for educators. Today's session was an icing on the cake. It was one of the most interesting sessions, and we have had educators from 4 countries join us today. We're extremely fortunate that Professor Malavika has shared her thoughts and joined us today with on the teacher community, and we learned some brilliant pointers on steps of brand building, defining and structuring the value proposition, and presenting for maximum impact. Citing a personal experience here, Professor Malvika has really helped us define our and value proposition to a great extent, and in clearing the entire process. And that is where I had first interacted with Professor. I'm really thankful that the interaction led to this conclave. Thank you so much for that, Professor.
Thank you, Varun, and all the best to teacher and to all of you educators in this new world. It's a tough one, but I'm sure with your knowledge and experience, we're going to win. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor. Dear teachers, Professor Malvika would be sharing a takeaway. So please fill the feedback form, and the feedback form's link would be shared in the chat box. So please fill the feedback form so that we can mail you the takeaway. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been an incredible week. In total, we have had over 2,000 educators join us globally from 7 countries during the entire conclave. And thank you so much for your reception. It's only because of your continuous encouragement that we are able to pull this off. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. It's been a very insightful session, and I hope we continue this journey forward.
Thank you, and good luck to all of you. Bye-bye.
హలో రేపు దాన్ని అంకుల్ కూర్చున్నాము చేద్దాము. సరే సరే ఏం రావాలి